we all know that things can go wrong during projects. The question always is, how do you react? What do we do? And of course, there might be smaller projects, there might be mid-sized projects, and sometimes you have large-scale projects, and when something goes wrong there, often the whole world sees it. So for example, and we start with real-world examples again, before we look at the problems, and then we look at how to do better. Let's just look at organizing the Olympic Games. And maybe you remember in February, Yoshiro Mori had to step down from the Japanese Olympics Committee because he made sexist remarks about women who need to have limited speaking time. Their time to speak must be limited because they never get to the point. And if you think this is bad, Hiroshi Sasaki now had to step down. He's the creative director for the opening and the closing ceremony of the Olympic Games, and he had to step down because he had the following amazing idea. He wanted to be a bit more inclusive, and of course, that's good. So he wanted to include Naomi Watanabe, that's a very well-known plus-size fashion icon in Japan, and he had the amazing idea to implement her in the opening or closing ceremony as well. In the first place, that's a good idea. His idea was, and now better sit down when you listen to that, his idea was that the woman, this plus-size fashion icon, will come down from the sky in a pig costume. Yeah, that's what you do, right? You just take plus-size people and then put them in a pig costume, and that's your approach to inclusion. So the second person within 2 months from senior leadership of the Olympics board had to step down in Japan. And by the way, consequences are always a good thing to do afterwards. At least now we are at the point where you have to take consequences, because otherwise you're simply going to lose too many customers. Not the most honorable motivation, but at least you now arrived at the point, at least in the English-speaking or in this moment international or Japanese-speaking world, that consequences are implemented. And consequences were also shown, for example, at London Pride. The board of London Pride, one of the most important and largest pride parades and protests we have in the world for equal rights, equal human rights, for example, for lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual people, queers, intersexuals, or asexuals, allies, LGBTQIA. So when they were accused by Romello Flick, a former senior communications director at London Pride, who served the board for many years and stepped down because he accused the board of racism, or better to say, of discrimination against the black community in this case, they looked at it, internal investigation, and within a couple of days, 5 directors from London Pride board stepped down. 5 directors stepped down. Of course, it is never great, and it's completely unacceptable to have these offenses in the first place, but we now arrived at the point where you can't get away with it. It's not enough to simply say sorry. Unfortunately, not every organization has understood it so far. So for example, when you look at Facebook in Germany lost a lawsuit. Facebook banned a picture from 2 gay guys kissing in front of the church in Mecca. The mosque in Mecca. And of course, there's no reason why you should ban 2 men kissing. So in a very unusual way, this young man, his name is Ahmed Shawan, sued Facebook. He sued Facebook for his right. He's from, of course, when you look at his name, you think, oh, can he be from Germany? He lives in Germany. He has a Muslim background. He sued Germany over having that picture online, and he won. Facebook now has to cover all the cost, plus has the PR damage. However, so far, Facebook did not apologize, and Facebook has taken no consequences from this wrongdoing. And of course, you can blame the algorithm, but then you need a better algorithm. And let's face it, most likely, they again use their so-called clearing agents who sit somewhere at the end of the world, completely overworked and underpaid, who looked through these pictures and then decided to ban it. And when they were not well trained, that's Facebook's problem, not the problem of their service provider. And when you think it can't get any worse, oh yes, it can. Heiko Vogel, a German football manager of Borussia Mönchengladbach, not their first team, but their second team, in public during a football match said, and that's why he was sent off, he said, women don't belong on the football pitch. That's why a female referee assistant reported him, of course, and sent him off, which is completely correct. And now you can think, what will be the punishment when someone in the year 2021 says, women don't belong on the football pitch? Drum roll. What could the German Football Association's legal team come to which conclusion could the legal team come? And their conclusion was the punishment is, and you will now think I made this up. No, I didn't. Their conclusion was, yes, he did wrong. Yes, it's unacceptable. And the punishment for him was, and is, he has to let 5 training sessions of a female football team now. So obviously the German Football Association considers it a punishment to be the trainer, the manager of a German football team for a couple of sessions, and then they think people will change their behavior. So first, someone does an offense towards a female person, not only to one female person, but to female people in general. And as a punishment, you give the person a leading position towards women. That would be the same if someone inappropriately touches children and you just say, oh, why not make him work in a kindergarten for a week? Because that's not how it works. Of course, this move was massively discriminating, massively sexist. There was an open letter to the German Football Association by all professional female players in the first and second league in Germany, and no reactions from the German Football Board whatsoever. And that is just another appalling move from the football in Germany. And sometimes you think, some industries just are a bit behind. Well, you can't get away with that. You can't get away with that by just saying our industry is a bit more conservative. You simply have to address it, because when you simply say our industry is a bit, let's say, flawed and we learn from it, let's look into banking. Banking, 2008 crisis. So for more than 10 years, they now had time to learn. And Goldman Sachs again made it to the press. And they made it to the press because their young junior bankers now are asking for a maximum amount of working hours per week. And they are asking for a maximum hours to work per week of 80 hours. And then you think, how many hours did they work in the past? And they could prove that they worked 95 hours per week. I have no idea where in banking there are still people who think when you work more, you are more productive. There is the tipping point, and we all know that over a certain and very short point of time, you might be more productive over a very short period of time. You might be more productive when there's an urgent project you have to finish, a couple of tasks, so a couple of days, one after another, you work a couple of hours more, fair enough. But when you constantly work 95 hours a week, the only thing you do is you damage your mental health, you damage your physical health, you damage the employer's brand, and also you show that you haven't understood anything about the modern working world. And I'm just wondering, how long does banking still think that they get away with just marketing and PR instead of true change? So congratulations, Goldman Sachs. Your leadership issues once more became more than obvious. So when we now look into what is the problem here, and the problems are, so one aspect of the problem is, let's say you have a project and something in this project goes wrong. Of course, you need to implement buffer time, which gives you the time to react when something goes wrong. Minimum amount of time is 20%, and even that normally will not be enough. And 20% will fill automatically. And now, of course, some people say, oh, I always put these 20% in because I just give my boss the wrong duration of all the tasks. Oh, so you're lying. So that's not great, but at least you put the buffer time in there. Often when people say, oh, extra time, buffer time, however you may call it, or extension time, there are different labels. Some of them already are judging so some, for example, say punishment time. Punishment time means people have to work it during over hours, which is, of course, not the right approach. So when you know that you have a certain duration of a certain task, 20% is the minimum you have to act at. Just because, for example, an external supplier suddenly can't deliver, or you have a global pandemic like we have right now, or someone just becomes ill, or someone leaves the organization, or someone on the client side leaves the organization, and simply you get a note where it says, sorry, we just have to make that person productive, and that might just take 2 to 6 weeks. So you need to plan enough time. And then the first aspect is, do not put too much focus on the quality of, quality is the wrong word. Don't put too don't put too much focus on serving your internal contacts more than the external contacts. Often people say, oh, there's a problem in this project. How can I look good inside our organization? And I will focus on that first, which means the solution for the customer completely gets thrown overboard and you only try to focus on your personal career. We all do mistakes, but when you focus too much and too hard on how do I look like in this organization, the only thing you do is you create a fake picture of yourself. People think you will do very well, you might get a promotion or two, and then you will fail so badly that no organization will ever touch you with a 10-barge pole, because you will lose your position, you will lose your job, and of course, with that reference in your pocket, you won't get a job anywhere. So focus on the solution. Don't focus too much on the internal context where you simply say, I'm doing my own self-PR instead of serving the customer and finding needs for the customer. Second aspect of the problem is, and then of course we will look into how to do better. The second aspect of how to do better is many people just think that time will heal everything. Maybe you know these projects in your organization where you say, oh yeah, we started that project and we just don't talk about that here anymore. And then you wonder, why don't people talk about it anymore? Well, because it went so horribly wrong. So when you think time will heal everything, the problem is this is not even true. Time will heal everything when it comes to the facts. People will forget certain facts by time, but people will not forget how you made them feel. So when, for example, you offended someone by simply not delivering on your promises, I'm not even talking about insulting someone. If we have, for example, listeners here, for example, from the Netherlands or from Germany, you need to get professional presentation coaching, because the way we communicate, for example, in Germany, especially northern Germany, where I am from, or in the Netherlands, is way too straightforward for most cultural approaches to project work. And you cannot say, hello, I'm German, I'm just a bit blunt. This is not how it works. You can't say, I'm Dutch, that's why I'm rude. This is not how anything in the working world works. You can't just show up and say, I am the problem and you're going to own this problem for me. This is never the solution. So when you think time will heal everything, it simply means that you're not focusing on any sustainable solution. And of course, you simply provoke that this problem will happen again. And the third aspect of what are the most common problems is that often people try to blame the other side. And some people do professional claim management, and please don't mix that up. Professional claim management is something which can be done as long as you do it openly and honestly, but claim management is not blaming the customer or blaming external people for what you have done wrong. You might know, just to get it down to a very small scale, let's say your internet connection at home fails. So you pick up the phone and you call your internet service provider and they say, oh, there's an external service provider and they just cut the cable somewhere in the country, so that's why you don't have internet. Of course your reaction will be, it is your job to create redundancy for these cases. It's not my problem that one of your external suppliers did something wrong, because I have a contract with you. So now getting back to your projects, why does your organization do the same? Why do you blame the customer or the client who hasn't delivered something, or someone, the mystical external supplier no one really knows, who miraculously failed, and they failed just in time, just ahead of the deadline, so you can blame them instead of taking the blame with your organization. People know what game you're playing, so don't go down this road. And the third aspect is, that was the third aspect is, and of course when people now wonder how can we do something against it, of course you can do seminars, trainings, coachings, you can get consultants in, you can have professional speakers during your event, which I highly recommend. You can of course have mentors, or you can have external project and interim managers, and of course, yes, I deliver these services, so just feel free to drop me an email and we take it from there. But now we're going to look into how to do it better, and when we look into how to do it better, there are a couple of steps you have to do when you have an interest in true change. And I don't mean that kind of change, which normally is nothing else than PR and marketing. So you just try to paint a really bad situation in nice colors. So the first thing you have to do when you want to do it better when it comes to project is, step number one is always be prepared that something goes wrong. So before the project starts, you have a plan in place where you looked at different situations, and you always look at it from the following point of view. You say, what could go wrong? What actions are we going to do? How do we communicate it? So there's a communication plan. And then you always have a specific plan. Who does which task and who communicates which message at which frequency to which people via which media. So it is very specific, it needs planning, but the good aspect of that is that you have a structured approach in case something goes wrong. Because when you do not do that planning, because often now I will hear that people say, oh, sorry, I just don't have the time for that. And when you say we don't have the time for that, it simply means someone will feel the calling to think it's my moment now to be the big hero. So someone will step up if you want it or not. Communicate with your client, and maybe they already say something which you might regret afterwards, especially when it's sent out in writing. So not having the action and communication plan in place before the project starts will be very expensive. So when something goes wrong, and that's the second aspect of how to do it better, the second aspect is when something goes wrong, you have to show real consequences. And for a very long time, the English-speaking world delivered masterclasses in the most negative way of how to do all talk, no trousers, and they changed significantly. I just gave you a couple of examples. So in the US or in the UK, when you say something inappropriate, especially when it's discriminatory of what you say, people have to leave their jobs. We had the chairman of KPMG who had to step down. We had the chairman of BT Communications who had to step down. So suddenly the English-speaking world that was always accused from the Central European world of doing all talk, no trousers, they now show the consequences. Of course, not in every industry, not in every situation, and not always when they should do so, but we see a positive change towards real-world consequences. Unfortunately, in many organizations, I do not see that happening. People always focus on trying to get away with it. When you have, and by the way, it doesn't have to mean, it really does not mean that we have to fire someone immediately. That's not always the first step you should do. Of course, when someone is deeply discriminating someone, then of course the person is obviously unsuitable for the job. However, when we look at the consequences, I just give you an example. When, for example, during that case which I just described of Borussia Mönchengladbach in Germany, one of your football manager makes a sexist remark. You significantly help your organization when you do, for example, which is possible, put an internal ban on that person. You can say, we ban this person from the football pitch for 4 weeks due to what this person said, and we as the board of directors consider that action inappropriate. However, if you, of course, wait to get away with it and get the best deal out of it, people will realize what you try. So always take proper actions first. Of course, people have the right to defend themselves, and people have the right that everything stays in the circumstances of their own privacy and inside the organization, as long as they are not a person of public interest, of course. When you are a person of public interest, you of course have to undergo public scrutiny, and of course you have to make a public statement. But most people are not people of public interest, and they have a right that they are considered not guilty until proven guilty, and that everything with the investigation stays confidential. That is their right. And of course, these rights apply to absolutely anyone, because we want justice, not revenge. A very important distinction. But when someone does something wrong, you of course can say either we demote that person, or there is less bonus than before, or no bonus at all, or they get a warning letter. There are many ways of how you can tell someone they have done something wrong before you lay someone off or fire someone. But when something goes wrong, show proper consequences. And the last aspect of how to do better, aspect number 3, is do proper lessons learned. And by the way, when you now say, oh, I know lessons learned, I don't talk about the lessons learned which you always learned during the project management courses and afterwards never did, because you always say there is no time to do that. That is not lessons learned. That is just everything, writing on paper lessons learned, then you do a bullet point list, we learned blah, blah, blah. That's not lessons learned. Lessons learned is, especially after mid-sized or larger projects, you preferably do an offsite, of course, only when it's legally allowed to meet again, not during a global pandemic, then please do it virtually. But when you have the chance, after it's legally allowed again to meet in person, do an offsite, nice location, sit together for 2 or 3 days, so you have a dinner or two together as well, so there is a social part, and you talk about what went wrong and how can we do better. And I just before the pandemic began with 2 companies did that. One company did it for 2 days, one did it for 3 days, and by the way, during the week, so don't steal the weekend from the people, because people will not appreciate that. And when you see what happens there, it is fascinating how much improvement you can do when you truly focus on lessons learned. In one case, and that was the 3-day approach, they even invited clients over and talked with the clients what went wrong and how can we do better, which had the consequence, by the way, that the client who was invited and who sent one of their project managers to the offsite, and this project manager said, we see how much you change right now, and we have an upcoming project, and we want to do it with you because we see that you are interested in genuine changes towards our industry. So during a lessons learned, they already pre-sold the next product and the next project with that client. Suddenly, normally that is the point where board of directors listen to me because they say, oh, pre-selling something, we can get a bit more money in. Yes, but that's not the primary focus of a lessons learned. Do the lessons learned. Yes, it costs some money. Yes, it takes time. But as long as you genuinely approach change in a way that you say you want to truly change your organization for the better, your client will be very happy, your people will be very happy, and due to that, your future projects will run a lot better. I wish you all the best implementing these steps in your organization. And for this week, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thank you very much for your time.